hello, and welcome to Summers at the Library, where we talk books and all things related to books. So, today we are talking about A Handmaid's Tale. Now, a lot of you may have watched the series. I have not watched the series. I actually read the book. I just finished it, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, let's get into it. Now, I will say this, just to give you a little bit of background on how I'm approaching this book. Um, while I did not watch the series, I've heard enough about the main gist of the plot of the story. Just from watching people in social commentary about what's going on in the United States and what have you over the last few years, I've heard people bring up the Handmaid's Tale or, oh, we're living in the Handmaid's Tale. And so that's pretty much how I got an idea of what the story was about. But one of my good homegirls mentioned this series just this weekend. We were hanging out, and she was just saying how disturbing it was. And for whatever reason, that just made me want to go read it. Not that I'm so into uh something that's that suspenseful. I mean, sometimes I am, but for whatever reason, I really said, okay, I'm gonna get the book. I'm not even going to go and look at the series. Let me get the book and see how I feel about it. So here we are. Okay, so let me give you the synopsis. All right. So, A Handmaid's Tale was written by Margaret Atwood, and it was published in 1985. Okay. And so here's the synopsis. In Margaret Atwood's dystopian future, environmental disasters and declining birth rates have led to a second American Civil War. The result is the rise of the Republic of Gilead, a totalitarian regime that enforces rigid social rules and enslaves the few remaining fertile women. Offred is one of these, a handmaid bound to produce children for one of Gilead's commanders. Deprived of her husband, her child, her freedom, and even her own name, Offred clings to her memories and her will to survive. At once a scathing satire, an ominous warning, and a tour de force of narrative suspense, The Handmaid's Tale is a modern classic. All right, so that's the synopsis. I had to get in close because I don't have my glasses on. So that's the gist of it, right? So we're focusing on this one woman's perspective in this world. Um, the timing of that the story is placed in seems to be right around the 80s when it was published. So you're looking at like 19, 83, 85 is where the story is set. Um, and as the author tells, well, as Offred tells her story, we go back and forth in time and we learn a little bit more about her. Um, we're introduced to her and she's in this house, she's in a room. Um, there isn't much in there. And you just learn about how she really is she just has this life where she's a handmaid and she's there to produce children. She's there to have sex with the commander. She lives in the commander's house. Um, the commander has a wife who cannot have children, and Offred has been assigned to this house. So there are many different handmaids. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert. If you if you haven't picked up on that already, spoiler, 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 spoiler. We're here to talk about the book. Um, I'm not going to give a play of the book. I'm really going to talk more about some of the questions I have and some of my reactions. But, just to give a little bit more of the story, um, as the synopsis said, things have gone downhill fast in the United States. And uh, this woman has found herself in a predicament uh, where she has no rights, and people are being killed for, their sins and different things. She doesn't know where her husband is. She doesn't know where her daughter is. And the story, I believe it takes place, how much time goes by here? Because I want to say Offred, and that's not her real name. It's actually uh the commander's name, and the different handmaids are like, you're of Red or you're of Glen, and so on and so forth. And then you're there to every month try to have a baby with the commander. It's a whole thing. It's a whole ceremony. It's actually called the ceremony. It's the whole thing. And I believe Offred said that she's either 32 or 33 at this point. I think it had been 3 years since everything started going downhill, since all of this happened. And I think she might have been in that house, uh, maybe, I don't know if it was a year. I don't know if it was a year. Uh, the time that we meet her and the time that she leaves. So that's pretty much the I think that's as far as I'll go in terms of just like how uh some of the summary goes. So hopefully you've read it or you're going to read it and you don't mind some reactions and you don't mind some spoilers. So I read on my Kindle now because I've always had so many books in my life, and when I moved to New York, I had to sadly, donate my books, and I decided to finally go electric, and I was the last holdout, but now I love it. But needless to say, if you know about having a Kindle, you can do these little highlights. And so there are some specific highlights that I'm going to go through, and we're just going to talk about reactions and just different things. So, one of the questions that I have about the book, about the story, I'm curious where all the people were. They mentioned that people were sent to the colonies and they were some people were cleaning up toxic waste, some people were executed, some people were picking cotton. Where Offred is and where the majority of our story takes place, it's really more of an affluent neighborhood. um she lives in a space of privilege, and many people have even said, in that world, how they try to make them think that they are lucky, really, because as a handmaid whose sole purpose is to get pregnant, they do have to feed her, and she's one of several. There's several handmaids throughout the district. um but they have to kind of take care of her. So, and they have to take care of the handmaids. They have to be healthy. They can't smoke. They can't drink. I'm not sure. I don't even think they really get to have desserts or sweets because they just want them to have an optimal environment to have children. But my question, I'm like, okay, so where are the other people? Um, are all the other people in these colonies? I just think about, big cities, and I just think about, okay, so I didn't get much of an indication of where the middle class people lived or the people that had children, like how did they live or what have you. But that was one of my questions. Um, okay, let's see. Did I have another question I had? So, were all the commanders married to women who could not have children? In this story, in Offred's story, um, the woman, her name was Serena Joy, that whose home she lived in, and Serena did not have children, and they didn't know if it was the woman or the man, but in this world, nothing is the man's fault. It has to be the woman. You're not going to say a man is sterile. So they would keep switching out the handmaids in hopes that one of the women would get pregnant. So, so I don't know. I'm just wondering for the other commanders, like how many commanders were there? Did any of the commanders' wives have children? That was just another little question that I had. So, all right, so let's jump into these highlights that I have here in the Kindle. Um, Before I jump into this, just some of my impressions in this story. Uh, it was very. I think anybody would say how um, it really gets you to thinking. It really gets you to thinking, and we'll go into this a little bit more because as extreme as this world seems to be, it also feels like it's very possible. And that's the scary part. That's what people uh, are pretty uncomfortable about, I can imagine, with the series, with this story, is how plausible this is. That, yeah, this could absolutely be life. And matter of fact, many elements of this type of world, they're nothing new. They're nothing new. People have actually gone through this. Women have gone through this. Uh, Religious persecution is nothing new. It's been going on uh, for centuries. You could almost say at the beginning of time. So um, that's really one of the scary things as you read this story, that it's happened before, and you know what? Who's to say it can't happen again? Especially when there are certain things that do ring very familiar in our day and age, of these, 2000s, right? So here's one of the highlights that I found. I wanted to share with you. Let me know if this also caught your attention. And again, this is in the book, right? So, this particular highlight, Offred was walking with off Glenn or of Glenn. So of Glenn. So that woman belonged to Glenn. Offred belonged to of Red, the other guy, the other commander. And so every day these two, they would go walking to get the groceries and such. They weren't allowed to really walk around by themselves. And you don't know who you're walking with when you're a handmaid. Somehow they're assigned, and two by two, that's how you go around. So needless to say, Every day, her and Ovglen are doing their walk. So it says, Offglen stops beside me, and I know that she too cannot take her eyes off these women. We are fascinated, but also repelled. They seem undressed. It has taken so little time to change our minds about things like this. Then I think I used to dress like that. That was freedom. Westernized, they used to call it. So this passage is talking about the two handmaids. They're walking through the town, and there was a group of Japanese tourists that were there and staring at them or what have you. They're staring at them, and the handmaids are looking at them as well. And what I found so interesting about this passage was she said it has taken so little time to change our minds about things like this. And I just thought that was so powerful. How she's like, I used to dress that way, and now I look at these women, and the description is not here in my highlight, but the women had on, skirts, shorts, those types of things. And the handmaids had to dress modest head to toe. Think, pilgrim type stuff. And I just think it's so interesting how it made me think about indoctrination. It made me think about, all of this is going to remind you of cults if you've read the book. But at the center of what's going on in a cult, it's indoctrination. And she says, wow, it's taken so little time to change our minds about stuff like this. I used to dress like that. And now I'm judging these women. I'm looking at them and they just look so naked to me because I've been in this world where everybody's all covered up. It's just wild. It's a really interesting thought how just such a 180, how that indoctrination can get into your bones. If you are living under a certain, dogma or teaching, and it's drilled into you day after day after day after day, you will start picking up on that thinking, So I just thought that was really, really interesting passage. So the next one I want to talk about. Oh, I thought, this one. It was so sad, but also I loved it. She was describing living with her husband, living with her family, different things that were going on in the time before. And she would often reference the time before. And she says, we thought we had such problems. How are we to know we were happy? How are we to know we were happy? Mm, that spoke to me just in a personal way. You know, that just speaks to life. It reminds me of something that I think it was Andy in The Office, the show on TV, one of my favorite shows. I think he says in the season finale, he says, I wish we knew we were in the good old days while we were there, or something to that effect. Of, in other words, be grateful every day. Every day, be grateful and be in the moment. Um, because it's probably not so bad. even when you feel like it's bad, you're probably fine and things are probably pretty good. So I just love that. And the writing, Margaret Atwood's writing, I think is just so beautiful, and it has her prose has a way of really giving you that voice of our handmaid and how she's processing this world and this life. So I think that Margaret Atwood did an excellent job with that. Another passage here. She says, I avoid looking down at my body, not so much because it's shameful or immodest, but because I don't want to see it. I don't want to look at something that determines me so completely. I highlighted that passage because I was really struck by I don't want to look at something that determines me so completely. And, that just speaks to being a woman and how, and at this passage, she was looking in the mirror. She was dressing or undressing for something, and she just didn't want to look. She had to take off her clothes and stuff, and she just didn't really want to see herself because I can imagine you're looking at your body. You have these female parts, and yes, you are female, and this is why you're in this predicament. It's literally because of these body parts that you have. You are treated differently. You are, regulated to this life because you were born with these organs. And I just think it's just so profound. And frankly, I mean, you could also look at men. Everybody is patriarchy hasn't done uh anybody any favors. Certainly, of course, it benefits men, but men suffer under patriarchy as well because you have the parts that you have, and there are expectations of you the same way the parts that we have, there are expectations of us. So, I just thought that was just a very poignant passage here. So, a couple more highlights, and then we'll get into our rating here, and some final thoughts on A Handmaid's Tale. Okay, so chapter 25, skipping ahead here. One of the highlights that I have here is she says, as for us, the handmaids and even the Marthas, we avoid illness. The Marthas don't want to be forced to retire because who knows where they go. You don't see that many old women around anymore. Again, speaking to the woman existence, the female existence in the world, how the woman's value. You're walking around in the world and you don't see old women in this new world order. Um the women are not useful after a certain age. Um it's depressing. It's just depressing. The women are not it's really a nightmare story of what would happen if, you know, truly in a man's world, what uh, you know, some man's fever dream is, have these women here that can have these babies, and then after a certain point, we can just get these old wrinkle bitties out of our sight and, bring in some new ones. It's just very Very interesting thought there. Let me know what your thoughts were on that particular aspect of womanhood, because that's really what the story is about. Um, even though, well, I'll get into it later. My expectations of more than that, but we'll get into that a little bit more with the final thoughts. Oh, okay. This next highlight. So, for those of you that have read the book, or this is probably in the series as well. So the commander and Offred, they start messing around, and it's a whole thing. So here in the book, um, she had asked him for some lotion. I think this is when he gave her some lotion because she asked for it. And so she says, the trouble is, I don't have anywhere to keep it. In your room, he said, as if it were obvious. They'd find it, I said. Someone would find it. Why? He asked, as if he really didn't know. Maybe he didn't. It wasn't the first time he gave evidence of being truly ignorant of the real conditions under which we lived. And that passage just made me so angry because it really spoke to how I think things really are. Especially with a lot of the laws uh pertaining to women and women's rights, and not even just that. I will even dare no, that's I wouldn't even say I dare say. I truly, when it comes to laws that are made that victimize poor people, people on drugs, homeless people, so on and so forth. So many of the people that make these laws and that have the power, I just don't think they even understand. They don't really understand what they're doing. And they don't really understand the cost. They don't really understand the repercussions of these laws that they put into place. And so here you have this commander who is, um, and I believe, the commanders are pretty high up. Like they're essentially a part of this system. And yet he doesn't realize, he has no idea how draconian it is, which speaks to the difference between being a have and a have not. It speaks to being a person in power and a person with money and a person with privilege, how disconnected a lot of these people are with what the common people are dealing with. And the sad and unfortunate thing around the world is that these are the very people making the decisions. The very people making the decisions don't really understand. How come our educational system is so terrible in the United States? How come our healthcare system is so terrible in the United States? Why do we have to why is our healthcare tied to our jobs, and why there's so many different things that impact the majority of our people. And when you look at the folks that have made these decisions so that we have to be going through all of these different hoops and hardships just to live our lives, more often than not, they don't even understand. They haven't really sat down and talked to somebody. They haven't spent a day or an afternoon experiencing what it's like to try to navigate what they have put in place, and I just think Oh, that part just made me so mad because this man is oblivious. He's just oblivious. Why can't you keep it in your room? It's like, sir, you don't understand. These people, these people come in here and they go through this room. They go through this room with a fine tooth comb. I can't have anything. None of the handmaids can have anything. This is not a fun life. Ugh. So, what did you think about the commander? Do you like him? Do you think he was being nice? Do you think he liked her? What do we think about the commander? I found him frustrating just for his ignorance alone, for his privilege alone. And there are some passages, I actually don't think I have them in my highlights, but he does have these debates with her from time to time as, they're playing Scrabble and doing what have you. And he has his whole little ideology of the world. And I think he was the one that said something like, you women, you used to complain about everything uh, and life was such a hardship for you. Look, we saved you from that. You weren't safe. You were out there, dating, and the men would do different things to you, and you complained about how life was. And this is better for you. Now you don't have to worry about all that. And he really seems to think that this is a good thing, you know. Um, so I don't know. It definitely seems like she was entertainment for him, you know. Um, he probably did grow to like her. Um, but it's just, it's still a little, it's still cringe. It's still cringe because even though Offred, um, and you can tell in the way it was written as well, she was torn about this. Of course, she was very uncomfortable about these meetings at first, but eventually they got very comfortable together. But she was always conflicted. Like, on one hand, it was, you know what, this breaks up the monotony. It gives me something to do. I get to look at magazines again. I get to have conversation again because they don't even get to talk to anybody. They're not even allowed to, like, have conversations, full on conversations with people. Um, so on one hand, she is getting something out of it, but then on the other hand, she can't help but feel like this guy, this is just something to help him pass the time, like a puppy. So, and it also gave me these thoughts. Did you think about how uh like slave masters would have these mistresses that were the slaves, Thomas Jefferson, so on and so forth, quite common. And they would have many children and they would have their favorite enslaved woman or what have you, or one or two or three. And you would occasionally hear people have these sort of debates about, well, it's possible that, a slave master could have been nice to their slaves. They weren't all mean or bad or what have you. And people will have these different kinds of debates about that, which we're not going to do here. We're not going to have that debate here. Um, but I did think about that whole concept because I just think any way you look at it, she's still enslaved. She still doesn't have her freedom. She is still essentially in jail. And yeah, you're nice. Okay, you give her something to think about and some conversation, but she still can't go anywhere. She still can't do anything. She still can't find her kid. She still, you know what I'm saying? And so it's like, I guess it's better than him being mean, I guess. Um, it's the lesser of the evils. I guess it doesn't hurt if the master likes you. It doesn't hurt. If we gotta be in this situation, maybe this is the best as good as it gets. And hey, I guess sometimes it's like that in life. But that's a whole, let me know in the comments, like, your thoughts on that, commander, because I'm about to wrap it up here. Um, we talk about Moira, and Offred gets to see Moira at this orgy thing that the commander takes her to, and but she doesn't get to see her again after that. We don't know what happens to Moira. Um, but one of the things that struck me was a passage where Moira was talking about how she's just like, she kind of figured out her way in the Jezebel place, and then she was just going to be kind of done with it or whatever. And Offred said, she's frightening me now because what I hear in her voice is indifference, a lack of volition. Have they really done it to her then, taken away something? What? That used to be so central to her. And how can I expect her to go on with my idea of her courage, live it through, act it out when I myself do not? I don't want her to be like me. Give in, go along, save her skin. That is what it comes down to. I want gallantry from her, swashbuckling, heroism, single handed combat. Something I lack. Ah, I love that. I love that, and I get it. I get it, and I just think it's expressed so well how Offred is this friend of hers that she knew from back in the day. Now in this changed new world, she's always been that feisty friend. And sometimes you see people or people in life that, man, you may not have it in you, but you're hoping that this person, they've got that fire. And it's just one of the saddest things in life to see the fire be put out of a woman. Like, when just life has beat her down, and this was somebody who didn't take no stuff, and now she's just kind of like accepted her conditions. It's sad to see that with the women who were fighting, the women who were, you know I'm gonna get out or die trying, like those women that were speaking up for themselves, uh fighting the good fight. Even if you don't have your voice, those women that did, whoever those people were that did, it just breaks your heart when they've lost that. But you get it. You get it. I mean, you understand. It's hard. It's hard. But so touching, that passage. So 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 touching. Um okay, and then I'm almost done here. I just have a couple more highlights. Woof, we are at 40 minutes. My goodness. Okay, we're about to wrap this up. A Handmaid's Tale. Um, Let me see here. Mm, 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 mm. Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and yes. So we're at the last chapter. So the story ends, and spoiler, if you haven't gotten it already, spoiler. The story ends and Offred is shipped away. Again, there's so much there that I'm leaving out. But we don't know where she ended up. Nick helps her get out. We don't know what happened to him. We just know that she's leaving the house, and we don't know the black van has come and got her. It put chills down my spine that the black van was coming for her. Uh, that was just, I'm like, oh my gosh, and she could hear it coming down the driveway. So the story closes there, but then we have a chapter called Historical Notes on the Handmaid's Tale. And I just thought this was so cool how the author did this, right? So the story officially ends, and you almost think that this next chapter is an epilogue or something, but in actuality it's from uh June 2195 is the year, and it's some sort of like college lecture, and these people in the year 2195 are discussing these tapes and a transcript from a handmaid during the age of Gilead, right? So we're talking, what is it? I don't know. What's the math? 150 years in the future. And they're talking about, so evidently Offred got out. She was in some sort of safe house or something on the run, but somebody recorded her telling this story and they found these tapes. Um, and that was just so cool. The way they presented that, because it really has you thinking about how, we're living in time and somebody's going to be studying us. We are all a part of a continuum, okay? We landed here on earth in our day and age and in our lifetime, and then we're going to be going, and we're going to be history. We're going to be history just like Abraham Lincoln and everybody else. And the society that we're in, why we did what we did or didn't do what we didn't do, somebody's going to be asked, they're going to be writing papers about us, you know? And I just thought that was so neat, the way they incorporated, the way people were trying to figure out, like, how did this Civil War happen? What were the attitudes that were going on in the 80s? People want, this happened in the world, um so on and so forth. And it was just, that was my really, oh my goodness, my favorite chapter. um and I think one of the most poignant things that they said in that chapter, as these different professors and historians are talking about it, they said there was little that was truly original with or indigenous to Gilead. Its genius was synthesis. There was nothing original about it. They're looking at it, and again, as I was saying before, they were like, okay, the persecution of people who weren't of a certain religion, um taking the rights away from women, having women just be basically breeders and cattle, and you know taking away their jobs, all this and that. They were saying this is nothing new. it's been happening, and it continues to happen. And so I just thought that was such a rich and a pure, profound thought. And so just to wrap this up, my final thoughts on this book, it really left me with this feeling of, see, this is why we have to understand history, because, but human nature, humans individually, we have a short memory, right? We tend to have a short memory. But even our collective consciousness has a short memory. We're born, we live our lives, and for most of us, most people don't really pay attention to what happened before. Most people, they read something in history, they had to pass history class, and they never paid attention to anything else in history ever again. And this is why history repeats itself, because people ignore it. And so much of this book, why it hits home, is because the rhetoric, the sentiments that led to this society were born of a return to traditional values, right? That was the main thread of how we ended up in this world where people are being executed, um, where, this whole law, and they murdered the Congress. That reminded me of January 6th, right? I mean, truly, when you look at any country, any government can be toppled. Why do we know that? Go look in the history books. They all have, practically, this is nothing new. You get people riled up enough, and you get people with some ideas and some weapons and what have you, and they can overturn the government. And now we're doing something else that we weren't doing last week, and it's such a scary thought, because in depending on where you live in our lifetime right now, living in the United States, you know, most of us, I mean, I don't, yeah. If you've been in the United States this whole time, you haven't experienced that type of political instability, and the types of things where regimes can come in and change everything. But this is happening all the time. There are people who have lived through that. And so, and it could happen anywhere. And so that's what makes this book so riveting. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. Definitely check it out. I'm gonna go ahead and watch this series probably. Um, but I thought it was just really good. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts were. I know I didn't cover, like, there's so much. I barely scratched the surface, but definitely let me know of anything else that stood out to you, and we can get down in the comments and talk about it. All right, take care now.